All right, everyone. Thank you very much for holding on while we let everyone join today's webinar. So again, myself, Nicholas Palmer, I lead Group IB's international business, and I'm joined together by Dmitry Volkov, who's Group IB's CTO and also a co-founder of Group IB. So what we intend to present today is the results of our analysis of different incidents that happen within the industry in our high-tech crime trends report. If you haven't had access to this report, you can email either myself or Dmitry and we can certainly provide it to you. But during today's webinar, we intend to go through some of the activities during the second half of 2018 up until the first half of 2019. And actually, I'll hand over the controls to Dmitry to start today's webinar. And then I'll rejoin you for the financially motivated aspect. So Dmitry.
Yes. Hello, I hope you can hear me well. Don't forget about asking questions. So we have a special panel here. Well, and I think we can start. So in our annual research, we study and describe the high-tech crime trends and use this information to predict how the threat landscape will evolve in the next years. In the beginning, I will speak about the key trend, which is open military operations. Then I will outline some key trends for energy and telecommunications sector, and then Nick will speak more in details about financially motivated threats. Oops, now it works. So if you remember what was in 2017, it was the year of massive ransomware attacks with such well-known threats like WannaCry, Bad Rabbit, NotPetya. The 2018 was the year of side channel attacks and of course vulnerabilities that were discovered in hardware. And in 2019 is a year of actually open military operations with new goal, that is destruction and disruption. And within the first 6 months of 2019, we've seen 3 military operations. The first one was in Venezuela, when the hydroelectric plant stopped because of cyber attack, and 22 of 23 states left in the dark. So what we know from this attack, actually nobody knows what tools were used to conduct this attack successfully. We know that people left without electricity for a few days. And if you compare with what we've seen in Ukraine in 2016 with Ukrainian blackout, at that time it was a quite small operation because only small part of region were affected. The energy disappeared only for a few hours, but in that case lots of noise were raised. Many researchers did really cool stuff. They did incident response, got malware samples, started to share knowledge about how this attack happened. And of course, quite fast, we were able to attribute it to Black Energy threat actors group. But in this case, we have zero knowledge about what was a threat actor, so no attribution, no information about tools, no indicators, and we know that it was more impactful because the whole country left for a few days without electricity. So in the next 2 months, Israel militaries launched an airstrike against a building that we believed was a headquarters of Hamas hacker groups that conducted hacking operations against Israel targets. And again, in the same, like it was in the previous case, nobody knows what were attacks, how critical were of course, what were tools and what were goals for Hamas hackers. But the building was destroyed, as I suppose, together with all computer equipment, and probably some people died. Just 1 month later, the American president says that he allowed his military operations against Iranian system responsible for control of rocket and missile launches, and that was because Iran's militaries were able to destroy US drone. And of course, this information, this operation was quite successful, if you can believe what is available in the public domain. And it's clear that it's impossible to identify such a critical system as a system that is responsible for controlling rocket and missile launches. It's impossible to get access quite fast, understand how it works, and of course disrupt it. It means that the system was attacked in advance. And again, as with in previous case, there's no information about tools, tactics, and of course, very ill impact. So in all of these cases, we have zero knowledge. But we see that the new goal is actually disruption and destruction. And we believe that, I think in the next scenarios, the similar threat actors would like to cause maximum social and economical damage. And there is one proven method how they can get this goal. So one of them is actually to disrupt communications in the whole country on a national level. And there are a few methods that were successfully tested by advanced actors, state-sponsored actors, even by cybercriminals, and it was successful. So we understand to disrupt the whole communication in the whole country, this is a quite complex attack, but it will be always split on a few phases. And I mean that phases were successfully tested. So I hope that we'll never see when some of the country will left without communications for a few days. So in the next slides, we're going to speak in more details about actually what was successfully tested. And I would say just a year ago, it was unthinkable that someone would like to destroy the communication in the whole country. But because of a new trend with disruption and disruption goal, we see that if special forces will get an order to destroy, they can do many disruptive actions that will potentially can cause a huge impact. So the first tested method was actually related to a BGP protocol. It's a border gateway protocol responsible for routing traffic on a global scale. As you know, this internet protocol was created when actually internet was invented. And of course, at that moment, nobody thought about cybersecurity. There's a lot of issues, well-known issues. I would say every security expert knows about them. Every telecommunication company knows about them, but it still exists. So and here we can see just a few examples from different regions, from Russia, Nigeria, Switzerland, and in all of them, it was a human mistake. And because of human mistake and misconfiguration of BGP routing, thousands of people lost internet connection or had serious problems with getting access to some services. Like in Nigeria, we lost access to Google services. But what is important, that downtime in this case usually is about an hour. So it means that it was successfully detected and fixed by employers, by operators quite fast. And when we speak about disruption, and the disruption should last not just 1 hour, but a longer period of time, you need to do some extra actions. What is also important to mention that there is no need, here in all of these cases, there is no need to be in the network infrastructure of a specific telecom operator. You can disrupt things remotely. But to be able to disrupt it for a longer period of time, you probably need to get access to a specific ISP to be able to understand how his network infrastructure works. You need this visibility because to disrupt it more effectively, you need to logically overload the network, like attackers did in energy sector when they overloaded the network in Ukraine and of course in recent Venezuela attack. So, but this will be just the first stage of an attack. So we can disrupt this, but operators and can still fix the problem, probably not within an hour, but again, within a day. So that's why it will be always the second stage that is related to sabotage. So it means that workstations and some internal servers that are used by operators to store their information, backup services, and actually manage the whole network infrastructure will be disrupted as well. And of course, there are many techniques and tools available at the moment that are successfully tested many times. I mean, different wiping tools, encryption tools that actually makes the host unavailable And of course, nobody can manage the network infrastructure if there is no computers operating in the network. But again, to be able to conduct this attack, you need to pass through several stages. You need to get access to one of the major ISP to understand how his network works. You need to understand how to logically overload the network. You need to then, after you launch the attack, to destroy workstation in the network. And yeah, of course, you probably will do some extra actions to resist the quick response from internal staff. Another reliable method to disrupt network communications is, of course, is to disrupt DNS communication. So everyone knows that domain name services is also a baseline, and of course is a basis for global internet infrastructure. And it has several layers, like domain register, administration of national domains, like .ru, .gr, or any other. And of course, there's a short list of root DNS service. And of course, there are organizations that manage this root DNS service, and there are only 12 organizations. And all these layers within 2019 were successfully compromised. So I think the most known operation when many domain registers were successfully hacked and information from was leaked is a campaign known as a sea turtle. I hope that most of you are familiar with campaign, but if not, please Google and you find lots of useful materials. On the other hand, there is a administration level domains, and some of them were also hacked. And we know about 2 cases in 2019. One of them was Institute of Computer Science and Foundation of Research and Technology from Greece was leaked, and the similar attack was conducted in Armenia. And also in 2019, the company that managed one of the root DNS service, NetNode, from Sweden, was also successfully compromised in 2019. So, but what threat actor can do with access to domain register, to national level administration company? Of course, he can get access to all the domain names issued by the domain register. And looks like that if a threat actor would like to disrupt network communication, he needs to get access to all the domain names, and of course, to be able to change every settings related to the domain name. And it's not, it sounds like some extremely hard to do, but in fact it's not. So you can see here 2 tables related to .ru zone and .sg, that is to Singapore. And you can see that if you want to be able to control most of domain names issued for a specific country, you need to be able to hack 1 or probably 3, 5 organizations. Like in case of Russia and .ru zone, you need to be able to hack only 3 domain register that are listed here on the top, and you will be able to control more than 70% of all domain names. In case of Singapore, if you want to control 20% of domain names, you need to be able to hack only 1 domain register. And after that, threat actor is able to get the same access as actually a register can. And as a register, they can change the IP addresses, they can change login and passwords for your personal account. They can actually disrupt the access to personal account. I'm sorry. So we can, and of course, we're able to suspend any domain name. So as a threat actor, we don't want to suspend just a domain name because the main goal will be to disrupt network communications. And you heavily rely on this. So you have websites, you have mail services, you have some internal services that use domain DNS protocol to communicate with each other in automated mode, and so on. And most of it usually rely on the domain zone relevant to your specific country. And of course, governmental organizations also use the top 5 domain register and also rely on the domain name services. So as a threat actor, he will be able to change the IP address, not to completely remove it, but just to change, because in this case, the traffic will still flow, but it will flow in the wrong direction. He will change the login and password. So to avoid situation when you as a domain owner would like to restore original settings. And again, on the next phase, to avoid situation when domain register would like to fix all the problems and restore actual normal operations, we'll need to go to phase 2 as actually sabotage, as in the previous case, and destroy workstation and servers on a domain register level. And it means that the whole communications with most of the domain names relevant to the country will be successfully disrupted. And there are some successful attacks on local filtering systems as well. And nowadays, more and more countries would like to control actual communication. We just want, sometimes we want just to be able to block illegal content. This is normal because there's a lot of network traffic, drug trafficking, weapon trafficking, some probably child abuse websites, and of course it's okay when you want to block access to this type of resources. But sometimes we want not just to be able to block it, but we want to get access to the actual packets to be able to decrypt the traffic and see what exactly people speak about during network communications. So the first system that is actually related only to filtering system when you want to block access usually works like this. You have a central node that distribute different lists of actually blacklist with illegal resources. Usually it's IP addresses and domain names, and every ISP in the country must block access to these resources. And it means that you have a central point to manage the whole process. And centralization is actually usually the main point of failure. And this is actually doesn't comply with the main idea of internet when you have a distributed and very reliable network. And we have seen successful attacks on such a filtering system. We've seen in Russia, because Russia was one of the countries when wants to block and actually blocking access to different types of resources. So what have been done? Some of illegal resources listed in this register of illegal resources. Then the threat actor who owns the domain name changed the IP address from illegal server to IP address of some legitimate service. Usually we use legitimate IP addresses of governmental websites, financial services, and sometimes such a popular services like Wikipedia or Yandex, the main search engine in Russia. And it was quite successful because every ISP start to update how the domain names resolves to an IP address. So next time we'll get when we resolve the domain name, we will get new IP addresses that is relevant to some legitimate government or financial resource. We'll add it to its local blacklist, and we'll start to block traffic going to these websites. And it means that some users will lost access to this type of services. And we started to see these activities since 2017, and we see it's quite successful even nowadays. So there are few ways how you can avoid such an attack, but it's still successful. And when we speak about advanced actors, they're able to get access as well to this central point and then to this blacklist any type of resources. And of course, if we're able to compromise the domain register with lots of domains, we can actually amplify the attack together with attack on the BGP routing as well. So the next type of filtering system is a traffic decryption. You know how it works. So to be able to monitor network traffic, you need to deploy on every host that you want to monitor SSL certificate issued by your trusted certificate authority. And of course, there are some software vendors like vendors of operating system, popular browsers, but potentially can mark this certificate authority as untrusted, and it means that the communication and trust chain will be broken and communication will be disrupted. This is what happened with dark matter company from UAE. This is what happened with certificate authority, governmental certificate authority from Kazakhstan. when we started to deploy such SSL certificates, and actually Google and Mozilla block these certificates, and it caused some disruption of services in Kazakhstan as well. So, but who could potentially conduct this type of attacks? So within a year, in public domain, 38 groups were described. I mean, different campaigns related to 38 groups were described. We've found 7 new groups that were active in different regions. But if 38 groups is not very short list, but if you take a look at the source countries, you will see that there are only 11 countries relevant to these 38 groups, and the list is like Russia, North Korea, Pakistan, Vietnam, Iran, United Arab Emirates, India, Turkey. So this is all developing country, and there is no mature country in the list. So it means that nobody able to detect activity from mature countries, or nobody just report about this. And it means that we deal with threat actors who possess the real threat, but they are definitely not the most advanced actors. Another interesting trend in APT attacks is, of course, a supply chain. Last year, we predicted that the most interesting target for supply chain attack will be actually developers, manufacturers of computer equipment that are usually located in Asia. And just a few months later, after that, the world became aware about attack on Asus when the infrastructure of Asus company was successfully compromised. They infected Asus Live Update legitimate utility that was distributed and digitally signed by Asus as well. So everything was legitimate. But this attack was very targeted. So the malicious payload was delivered only if a victim computer was matched with specific criteria. And they know about Asus, but in the same year, in the same region, there were 3 unnamed companies that were also successfully compromised. Also in 2018, the world got aware about a campaign named as a cloud hopper. And if you believe what was researched by other vendors, the network of Hewlett-Packard and the IBM corporation was successfully compromised because they provide services to many companies over the world, and attackers used their infrastructure to get access to companies located in 12 different countries. So also we know that threat actors, I mean advanced threat actors, looking for ability to deploy the malware in a more effective way, not just attacking the MSP providers or hardware and software developers. They even want to be able to infect the software that is created for software developers. And we've seen this attack in 2019 when a company was successfully compromised. Threat actors were able to get to the infrastructure responsible for building the software, and the software was a very specific and is used usually by developers, and we know that developers are located everywhere in every enterprise company, and of course in governmental sector as well. Another interesting activity is actually hacking back, and we observed within a year 3 successful operations that is worth to mention. One of them is related to Iran, when a threat actor, the first activity relevant to successful that indicates that the Iran APT group was successfully compromised started in 2018, when from a network infrastructure that was successfully attributed to oil rig, that is attributed to Iran, started to deploy very custom Mimikatz tool. And this tool was very unique, and before it was attributed to Tugela group, that is Russian. So it means that the infrastructure was compromised. Just a few months later, through a Telegram channel that is, I don't know how to pronounce, some very weird name, but you can see it on the slide, started to post some quite sensitive information, like a source code used by oil rig, some information about victims, tactics that were used by this group, and so on. Then new in the same channel, we started to distribute information about another Iranian group, Muddy Water. And to distribute this type of information, we use Telegram channel. There are other cases like in Russia. Almost right after the Quantum, it's a Russian research institute, were listed in the sanction list of United States. It was successfully hacked, and the hacktivist group named themselves like a Digital Revolution started to publish documents from a corporate network that actually confirms that this Quantum Research Institute was successfully breached. And the reason why we were selected as a potential target, because not just because we were listed in the sanction list, but because we were subcontractor for FSB. Another subcontractor for FSB, Cytec, was also hacked, and information leaked from this subcontractor started to be distributed from a website managed by Revolution Group as well. Similar activity started with China-related APT, APT 17. Where infrastructure also was successfully hacked, and information about tools, tactics, and of course, what is most important, about individuals that were involved in this activity started to be distributed from a hacktivist website managed by Intrusion Proof hacktivist group. And this is actually quite interesting trend, because it have proof of positive effect, because it gives every security expert an ability to research more deeply the activity of advanced group. Now you're able to successfully attribute previously researched attacks. Now you're able to better protect your existing companies. But on the other hand, there's a huge problem behind it, because information about how a specific threat actor operates, what tools they use, and of course, if this tool became available in the public domain, means that another threat advanced actors can mimic to this to APT whose infrastructure was successfully compromised. And it means that in the future, we will face huge problem with attribution, of course, investigation, and some other negative effects. So let's speak about telecommunication centers. So you can see here the list of threat actors that successfully targeted and attacked different telecommunication company over the world. And you can see that this list is longer if we compare it with other sectors as well. So it means that telecom sector is the most attractive target for NAPT actors. And of course, the reason why, because we can use telecommunication sector companies for espionage, for supply chain attack, and of course, it's extremely important with new goal when attacker wants to disrupt and destroy. Most, I think, interesting trend is actually evolved threat landscape for 5G. And the reason why there's two main issues with 5G that is became more and more popular and implemented in few telecommunication company. The first issue is actually because of shift from a traditional, very specific telecommunication equipment to a standard IT approach. Because now we can think about 5G infrastructure as about actually IT platform or as a software platform that actually works on standard operating system that is running on a standard service that is hosted in standard data centers. So it's a great opportunity for every telecom operator. They can now scale the network infrastructure much more easily and manage it much more easily, but the attack surface expands extremely, and all these threats that were relevant to data centers, hosting companies, for operation systems, now are relevant to 5G as well. Another second, and the second issue with 5G is actually network slicing, because now in the past, it was, in case of telecommunication equipment, we usually deal with hardware segregation or hardware isolation. And it's not true for 5G anymore, because now isolation is logical, and it means that anybody that provides services for 5G customers now have access to actually 5G platform and potentially can escape from this logical isolation. And of course, it's also expand the attack surface as well. For 5G, another important trends are supply chain, of course, what we mentioned before, attacks on BGP level that we mentioned in the beginning, and of course, SS7 that is rarely exploited, but again, it's still active, and some of threat actors use vulnerabilities in SS7 to attack different companies over the world. So this is the list of our forecasts for telecommunications sector. But I think the most important and the most interesting is actually about 5G competitive war. And we see this competitive war nowadays, and it's a war between governments, not IT giants, because the leadership in 5G sector will give you a strategic leadership in IT segment as well. So you will actually manage the rules, the standards. You give lots of opportunities for your local companies to create new products. And of course, government will do everything to be the leader in this area. And we now see a competitive war between China and US for this huge market. And of course, to be able to be a leader, we will probably involve in APT groups as well. And we will see, I hope, more security researchers, probably some successful exploitation of unknown vulnerabilities in 5G infrastructure. And this information will be publicly disclosed just to ruin the reputation of your competitor. As I mentioned before, the threat attack surface will be expanded. So, as we mentioned as was described in the last annual report, and we described UEFI threats, side channel attacks, and supply chain attacks became more and more relevant for telecommunication sectors. And of course, 5G will give new opportunities for threat actors who conduct DDoS attacks, provide proxy service, and of course distribute malware as well. So let's speak now about energy sector. You can see here also the list of threat actors that were successfully attributed to attacks against energy company. But I would say that the most advanced actors are invisible at the moment. So you see that right now we have, wait a second, about 8 threat actors that successfully did attacks in the past, but all these threat attacks originated from 3 countries. It's Iran, Russia, and North Korea. Of course, are not the most advanced threat actors. And we know it because the invisible players related to Stuxnet, Duku, Flame, and of course, in a case of Venezuela attack, are more advanced, have more advanced tools, and hide their operations and actually traces much more effectively. What is also important to mention that the Middle East became a testing ground for attacks in this region. And it was true since the Stuxnet attack, and it's true even nowadays, because most recent threats that were discovered against energy sector usually was discovered in the Middle East. And when we speak about the protection of energy companies, usually people and security experts think about OT networks and security solutions developed to protect OT networks. But in fact, to protect the energy company, we need to start from standard IT networks, because all these attacks and all regional penetration vector usually goes through IT network as well. Of course, supply chain. Supply chain could be the main method to get access to these isolated environments in energy company. And if we compare with financial or telecommunications sector, where spear phishing is most actively using method. So in case of energy sector, the supply chain will be one of the most method to deliver malicious code. We also expect that the most serious attacks will come from developed countries, and of course the most heavy destruction that we expect to see will happen, unfortunately, in the Middle East, because again, for the last 10 years, the Middle East was the main target for such threat actors. So I think here I should pass to Nick Palmer. Nick, please.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Dmitry, for the summary. It's very interesting to see all of the attacks in terms of frequency and criticality, to the daily lives of individuals increasing. Both scary and interesting all at the same time. So now let's shift focus to threats to the financial sector. And first we'll look at some of the different targeted attack groups that focus their attention on the financial sector, on banks. Essentially, we have 5 different groups from 3 different countries that are conducting attacks on financial institutions. 3 out of the 5 groups within this list are Russian-speaking threat actors, which operate in various regions. Of course, you can see here kind of at the bottom of the timeline, the main actors that, were predecessors to Korko, Anunak, Butrap, and Lurk, of course, some of the other groups that aren't operating anymore. And you can see, you can see the activity from Cobalt continuing up until today, even with the arrest of the criminal operator of that group a couple of years ago now, hard to believe, a couple of years ago. In terms of the targets for these different targeted attack groups, you can see Silence, main targets with ATM, card processing, and ARM CBR. We don't see them attacking SWIFT systems. The only group that we see attacking SWIFT and successfully is Lazarus, and also for targeting different ATM switches, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation about threats to the financial sector. In terms of attacks targeting different interbank systems, here you can see basically on the top of the timeline running from January of 2018 up until the first half of 2019, all of the attacks that took place on organizations not in Russia and the CIS on the top, and on the bottom, the attacks that took place targeting Russia and CIS countries. You can see marked in green are the organizations that were targeted but actually managed to prevent attacks against their organizations. The yellow being unconfirmed cases but suspected cases, and the red being confirmed cases. Interestingly, I didn't mention on the last slide, one of the newer groups that we see coming onto the scene is a group called Silent Cards, which is a group which operates out of the African region and targets specifically African financial institutions and ATM networks in order to conduct their attacks. ATM switch is another very interesting target for APT groups. Specifically, we see Lazarus targeting different ATM switches, and we'll talk about their attacks later on. In terms of card processing attacks, the only group that we see interested in this is Silence and Silence Cards that target card processing system and have successful use cases to do so. In terms of SWIFT, certainly in the media, you can see that the number of attacks against SWIFT has certainly cooled off since August of 2018. The only attack against SWIFT systems or banks that use the SWIFT network was just before February of 2019 when the Bank of Valletta case happened. Still, we see that Lazarus is the only group that has successfully attacked SWIFT and continues to target that system within the bank's networks. We see minimal interest from other targeted attack groups as the effectiveness and the ease at which you can actually remove money from the financial institution is much more difficult, especially for lower end financially motivated APT groups like Silence or Silent Cards, who tend to target the ATM systems or switches within the banks, as it's easier to cash out. In terms of the ATM switch attacks, it's actually an interesting logic of how it actually occurs. There's been a number of different use cases. You can see running from 2016 until 2018, we've seen 4 instances of these particular types of attacks. In 2017, an unidentified bank, purportedly from South Korea, where they had an ATM incident in 2017 involving about 30 different countries with the cash out operations. Probably the most well-known situation involving ATM switches was the attack against Cosmos Bank in 2018, where hackers managed to get about $13.5 million through simultaneous withdrawals from ATMs in 28 countries. In terms of the logic of how this type of attack works, of course, the attackers have to gain access to the bank's infrastructure and then identify the servers which have access to the ATM switch. From there, they download a command line utility, in order to inject code. Then the process is fairly simple for them. They need to look for specific financial requests that are obviously fraudulent requests. They intercept those fraudulent requests and replace them with legitimate looking affirmations. So instead of it actually reaching the payment switch, the attacker would sit before that, receiving some of the requests through the different financial networks and replacing those with an approved answer without actually reaching the payment switch. So this type of attack we certainly expect to see more of. And these are some of the forecasts that we have for targeted attacks within the financial sector. Silent cards, we believe, will remain a local threat, specifically targeting the African banking sector. Other attackers could copy some of their techniques as they're becoming a more well-known group. We believe Lazarus will be the main author of new different types of techniques targeting the banking sector. Obviously, with the amount of sanctions that are being placed on North Korea, the country needs to fund their operations militarily, and the creativity and the aggressiveness at which we see Lazarus attacking the banking sector is expected to increase. Also, an interesting forecast is TrickBot. So recently, TrickBot has been modified in order to be able to use Mimikatz and other tools, which could signify that this banking Trojan could be used to conduct targeted attacks because of the newly added modules that the Trojan has. We also forecast that APT groups such as Silence, Moneytaker, and Cobalt will start to use sabotage as a final stage of the attack in order to complicate the forensics and investigations process, and also to hide some of the attribution capabilities to disrupt the network as they leave. So shifting focus to carding statistics. So from the second half of 2018 up until the first half completion of 2019, we can see a growth in the number of cards. We can also see a growth in the maximum price, and in general a market increase in the terms of carding. We do see a decline in the price per card, average falling from $33 to about $22 in the average price. We also see a 71% increase in the total number of cards with dumps that have been obtained through POS infections or POS Trojans. We saw a number of large situations where high volumes of credit card informations with dumps or the information for the magnetic strip being posted to underground forms. So an interesting statistic there. We also see a growing threat from different JavaScript sniffers. These are obviously tools that once exploiting vulnerabilities in CMS software can install on an e-commerce website and steal the payment card details from would-be customers of that resource. So we certainly see an increase in the volume of payment card details that have been compromised as a result of different JavaScript sniffers. within carding. In terms of POS threats or cards coming from different POS infections, you can see that there's certainly an increase in the number of dumps that are offered for sale on underground forums. In fact, a 46% increase in the number of dumps that were for sale. You can see the numbers essentially of dumps that were for sale during this year. About 93% of all of the stolen cards were issued by US financial institutions. Very interestingly, you can actually see Kuwait and Pakistan as number 2 and 3 on the list of countries with dumps posted to carding forums. The main reason for this is for Lazarus attacks on institutions within Pakistan in order to compromise these card information and try to post them on underground forums for financial gain. There was 14 mass leaks in total, and all of them were connected to different retail organizations that have had their POS terminals actually infected with malware. And we certainly see an increase in the number of attacks against these types of organizations. You can see on the right-hand side also some of the new POS Trojans that have entered onto the scene. So an additional 4 that we see targeting POS terminals, and on the right-hand side you can see the old and active Trojans that continue to be active in the region. Moving our attention to JavaScript sniffers, in total, Group IB recognizes about 38 families of JavaScript sniffers. I know MageCart is one of the popular terminologies for JavaScript sniffers as a whole, but we recognize different families of these JavaScript sniffers. And of course, we look at the criminal operators that are behind this activity, which I think is most important, whereas JavaScript sniffers like MageCart is just a tool for cyber criminals to operate with. 11 families of JavaScript sniffers are specifically targeting websites in Asia. You can see the different countries of different websites that have been infected by JavaScript sniffers targeting Asia. Clients in the USA are the main target of attackers for different POS malware. Also, very interestingly, I think it's important for organizations to be aware of some of the regulations and guidelines and the associated fines that go along with that. I think many of you probably know that British Airways was one of the first companies to be a victim of JavaScript sniffer infections on their e-commerce sites, and they were recently fined approximately $220 million for being such a victim. So certainly this type of fine, the increase by different cyber criminals to conduct this type of attack should bring awareness to trying to protect and be aware of this type of threat, certainly if you're running an e-commerce or online banking portal. How do cyber criminals acquire these JavaScript sniffers? It's quite simple, actually. They can range on underground forums from anywhere from $250 to $5,000 on the underground market. Primarily, these JavaScript sniffers target Magento CMS software. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the other CMS softwares that are targeted by different JavaScript sniffers. In terms of the domains that are targeted, largely it's still .com domains. As you can see here, with 65% of the websites infected linking back to .com domains. So shifting our attention to web phishing, maybe I can pass this one over to you, Dmitry, to talk a little bit about some of the capabilities in terms of the anti-evasion techniques that are built into web phishing and different management systems that have been engaged with.
Yeah, sure. So web phishing is a very not interesting topic, to be honest. So nothing's changed significantly for the last maybe 20 years when phishing was involved. But we see that there is some sort of shift of focus of financially motivated phishing attacks. So first of all, of course, is anti-evasion techniques. So we see more and more that threat actors that develop phishing keys and use them try to block access to phishing page by different security vendors, because there's a huge number of vendors who provide anti-phishing services on the market. And of course, they know which IP addresses these vendors are using, so that's why they block by their subnet. They block by different user agents that are most popular among these security vendors. They even block by some regions, because if I understand that the main target is let it be Singapore or maybe German, will block access to phishing page from other countries, because we don't expect any victims to come from other regions as well. So this is how we try to avoid detection. Where you also starting to implement some additional methods like redirection to official websites. So it means when any third team or security vendor will ask the domain register to suspend the domain name relevant to phishing attack, probably the domain register would like to check if it's a real phishing website. And when it goes to a phishing website, it will be redirected to a legitimate resource. And it means that probably that technical support from domain register will say, oh, come on, it's not a phishing website, it's a legitimate resource, probably you did mistake. And that's why they don't take the decision to block it. We also see some really interesting and sophisticated, I would say, traffic management schemes for social networks, how we engage lots of people to distribute the malicious and sometimes in the first stage not malicious links. But it's again about the management. We also see that there's some competition between different actors who develop phishing kits. So because in the past we've seen usually that they collect log files and text log files in some sort of databases, but we didn't use in the past really nice looking web interfaces to manage phishing attacks. Nowadays we see that we develop more and more different interfaces to be able to not just to collect information, but sometimes manage it in real time. Like here you can see some sort of first one is a young sister panel. Again, it's about phishing, so we can see how we collect different email addresses, logins, of course, bank card information, and so on. In the middle, you can see the interface to manage web phishing kit that is responsible for collecting credit card information, CVV, phone numbers, IP addresses, and there are even some actions available on the websites, like to remove it, to ask some additional data, and so on. And another interesting fact that we see that in the past, the threat actors that were responsible for managing banking malware, within the last maybe 5 years, we have created really interesting and very convenient and easy to use tools to conduct online fraud. I mean, we were able to, in real time, to intercept logins, passwords, one-time confirmation codes, to ask additional questions, so interact in real time with the victim. And now we start to sell these management systems not only to banking malware botnet owners, but also to guys who is actually using web phishing attacks. And I think the last one and the most interesting is actually about DNS hijacking attacks with involvement of phishing, because in the last our report we also predicted that probably the botnet owners who manage and were infected, what usually people call IoT botnets, will start to use it to conduct phishing attacks, because the most part of an infected device in IoT botnets is actually not an IoT device, but the home routers. And if you have access to home router, you're able to change different settings, including DNS settings, and it means that you're able to manage the traffic. So this is what happened in Brazil. So within just 1 week, someone infected about 100,000 home routers. They change DNS settings and start to redirect traffic for banking application to actually malicious web server where they hosted phishing web pages. And of course, there was a configuration file, and all of those phishing pages were relevant to financial institutions from Brazil, but one of them was a Netflix too, and they started to collect credit card information actually using phishing kit mimics to network brand.
Thanks. Kind of an internal joke here as well. Phishing is Dmitry's favorite topic in terms of financially motivated threats. All right, so shifting our attention to different ATM threats, we detected 3 new ATM Trojans. One being an incident with an unknown Trojan happening within Africa in April of 2019. In January of 2019, we see the sales of Hello World, targeting specifically Windcore and Diebold Nixdorf, ranging in price between $2,000 to $10,000 for the source code of this particular ATM Trojan. We also see Java disk cache, presumably connected to incidents in Colombia and also in Mexico. 3 old and active Trojans that we've seen throughout this year is, of course, Cutlet that we've seen active. We've also seen version 2 of Cutlet, also known as Windpot, and also Plotus malware for different ATMs. Here you can actually see the casino-esque version of Windpot that our reverse engineers identified when we looked into that particular case. So kind of an interesting finding from that activity. And we see 2 publicly available ATM Trojans as well, which may lead to additional attacks by potentially unskilled or lesser actors than your typical advanced persistent threat actors that are financially motivated. In terms of PC Trojan, really development has stopped by Russian-speaking hackers. They haven't created a new banking Trojan for PC or Mac, and even some of the Trojans are disappearing. Brazil is the only country that we've seen developing new banking Trojans or seeing new banking Trojans targeting the financial sector. The damage has also dropped connected to PC banking Trojans or PC Trojans in general, and 18 countries are being targeted by PC Trojans in general. Probably the most interesting thing, as we mentioned earlier on, connected to TrickBot, is the modifications of this particular Trojan, adding ability to use Mimikatz, being fileless, and adding additional capabilities for sysvol, and also a password stealer in order to potentially escalate privileges after infecting the corporate network. So definitely an interesting year coming up for TrickBot, especially considering the additional capabilities that we've seen. You can see some of the given the news, some of the Trojans actually disappearing as well, and very few entering into the market. In terms of Android Trojans, 15 of Android Trojans have actually disappeared and not customized for new operating systems. Those are used for scams via SMS have also disappeared. We've seen 5 new Trojans appear during the year. You can see them listed in the middle column. One of them is specifically only used in Brazil and has been placed on the Google Play Store, and it rents for on average $800 to $2,000. Looking at Russia, the CIS and USA, they're under a little bit of a taboo for Trojan developers. They can only be used for other countries, not specifically targeting Russia, CIS, or the US, which is interesting from the Android Trojan perspective. Gustav has different automatic transfer system mechanisms, which is quite comprehensive and allows infections to take place and then automatic transfers to go from that infected mobile device's bank account into an account of their choosing, in a fully automated fashion for the threat actors. In terms of self-protection, there's also some interesting findings for different Android Trojans, adding new methods to evade different sandbox capabilities. For example, using different data accelerometers in order to try and avoid sandbox detection tools. Also, push notifications in terms of one-time passwords are no longer a reliable method. Accessibility services are really the prerequisite for operation of most of the banking Trojans that we see on the Android banking side. In terms of forecasts, we see that JavaScript sniffers will replace banking Trojans. We see that cyber criminals are being extremely effective at compromising payment card details, and we'll certainly see a continued shift by threat actors to compromise different e-commerce web pages and steal more payment card details. We will also continue to see a reduction in the PC banking Trojans and Android, and they will continue to disappear at a rate faster than new ones are appearing within the market. We also believe that social engineering will become one of the primary methods for theft and acquiring approaches for different protection as well. We also believe that owners of botnets, as Dmitry mentioned earlier, will shift focus from actually conducting DDoS attacks to conducting DNS hijacking attacks on different routers in order to send individuals to their phishing web pages instead of legitimate resources. We also believe that remote control will be actively used on mobile devices in order to receive card data or actually pay for different fake services. Also in the bottom left-hand side, you can see standard format for creating different ATS operations for mobile Trojans could appear and be similar to the capabilities of former Zeus activities as well. So with that, we'd like to conclude the webinar and move to the question and answer section of the webinar. We would, of course, invite you to join Group IB's Trusted Member Club. This is essentially a communication tool for Group IB in order to share some of the information that we share within the Group IB intelligence and also develop a private community. It's not designed for advertising or anything like that. So if you'd like to join up, just scan the QR code there. And you can join. If you don't want to scan the QR code, you can email Dmitry and I, and we can add you to the list. So with that, we'll move to Q&A, and we'll be happy to stay on the line and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you. So there's a few questions on the line, one of them being a question related directly to managing different risks connected to fraudulent payment transactions or attacks against the client side. So I think we talked a lot today about JavaScript sniffers and that being an increasing trend for threat actors to compromise payment card details. The main method for this type of attack is to exploit vulnerabilities in different CMS software or brute force the control panels of the CMS software in order to install JavaScript sniffers and steal payment card details of would-be customers. So naturally, steps to take is to understand some of the vulnerabilities that may exist within the CMS software that you use on your e-commerce webpage, ensuring that it's up to date, and putting the proper control mechanisms in place for any type of brute force attack that might take place against your CMS. Also, in terms of different risks connected to fraud, you can think about fraudulent transactions that may happen from users that have been compromised by malware. You saw different ATS operations being included in different capabilities of mobile malware. So naturally, having different transactional fraud systems to monitor for unusual or suspicious transactions is one method that you can take. Actually, our partner GBG did a really interesting presentation about some of the ways that they can detect against suspicious payments. And another way that you can identify potentially fraudulent events leading to fraud is to analyze some of the behavioral elements on the client's device. For example, typing cadence or cursor movements or other biometrics to understand if it's a real user or potentially botting activity like ATS operations from different mobile Trojans. And of course, Group IB has such a solution that we can tell you more about at another time if you're interested to learn about. All right, thank you everyone very much for joining today's webinar. If you're interested to receive a copy of the slides, certainly send us an email and we'd be happy to supply those to you. So wish you a good evening or good afternoon wherever you are in the world, and look forward to speaking again soon. Cheers.